The transport shuttle groaned like a dying beast as it clamped onto the docking umbilical of the Zenith Ring. For a man who had spent the last 7 years breathing recycled grit in the slag pits of Veloni's prime, the sound of pressurized air hissing into the cabin was the sweetest melody I'd ever heard. I checked my duffel bag for the 10th time. It contained 3 grease-stained manuals on kinetic architecture, a half-functional Cortex link, and every single credit I'd managed to scrape together by working double shifts in the deep-bore tunnels. At 25, I was old for a first-year student. Most of the kids around me were scions of the hegemony's upper crust, their skin glowing with expensive gene therapy, their eyes bright with the confidence of people who had never known hunger. "Welcome to the Zenith," the pilot's voice crackled, sounding bored. "Mind the gravity shear on the way out. We wouldn't want any of you bright sparks to paint the deck with your lunch." I stood up, my magnetic boots clanking against the floor plates. My muscles were thick and corded from years of heavy labor, making me look like a blunt instrument in a room full of delicate glass sculptures. As the airlock cycled open, the sheer scale of the station hit me like a physical blow. The Zenith Ring wasn't just a structure, it was a spinning cathedral of chrome and light, 300 kilometers in diameter, hanging in the velvet dark of space like a god's wedding ring. "Cyprian Vane?" a robotic voice asked. A small, hovering drone drifted toward me, its optical sensor pulsing a soft blue. "That's me," I grunted, adjusting the strap of my bag. "Unless the hegemony decided to give my slot to someone with better hair." "Identity confirmed. Student ID, Alpha 729er. You have been assigned to Residential Sector 9G. Please follow the illuminated path." "And Mr. Vane?" "Yeah. Try not to scuff the flooring. It was polished just this morning." I flipped the drone a bird, a classic street slang gesture that it probably didn't have in its database, and started walking. The air in the station tasted of ozone and expensive filtration, a far cry from the metallic tang of the mines. Every corridor was a marvel of engineering, the walls shifting slightly to accommodate the station's rotation. It was beautiful, sterile, and deeply intimidating. Sector 9G was a series of curved hallways lined with sleek white doors. I found room 42 and pressed my palm to the scanner. The door slid open with a whisper. The room was surprisingly large, featuring a wide viewport that looked out over the swirling violet gas clouds of the Nebulan Veil. There were 2 sleeping pods, a shared workstation, and a small kitchenette. One side of the room was already occupied. A collection of crystalline shards sat on the desk, pulsing with a faint, internal rhythm, and a set of shimmering iridescent garments hung in the open locker. "Great," I muttered, tossing my bag onto the empty pod. "A roommate? I was hoping for enough peace and quiet to finally finish my calculus without someone blasting synth pop." I began unpacking my gear. My tools were worn, the brass casings polished by years of use. I laid out my kinetic wrenches and my Cortex link, feeling like a primitive savage trying to set up camp in a royal palace. I was halfway through organizing my technical manuals when the door to the sonic washroom slid open. A cloud of vapor drifted out, smelling like rain on hot asphalt. A scent I didn't recognize but found strangely intoxicating. A figure stepped out, and my brain stalled. She was tall, nearly 2 meters, with skin that looked like polished opal. It wasn't just white, it was translucent, revealing faint, glowing pathways of cerulean light beneath the surface. Her hair was a waterfall of silver filaments, still damp, clinging to shoulders that were wider than a human woman's, but possessed a terrifying grace. She was wearing nothing but a towel draped loosely over one hip, and her eyes, large pupilless orbs of shifting gold, locked onto mine. "Oh," she said. Her voice didn't sound like speech. It sounded like a chord played on a glass harp. "You must be the meat-based life form the administration mentioned." I stared. I knew I should look away. My human brain was screaming about modesty and social taboos, but the sheer alienness of her beauty held me pinned. She wasn't just another species. She was a masterpiece of biological art. "Cyprian," I managed to choke out, my face heating up until I was sure I'd tripped the fire sensors. "Cyprian Vane. They didn't say I'd be sharing with an Oculon." She tilted her head, a bird-like movement that caused the blue light beneath her skin to pulse faster. "I am Xylanthia, of the House of Ethelgard, And you are very a red Cyprian Vane. Is your cooling system malfunctioning? No, I said, finally forcing myself to turn around and stare intently at a blank wall. It's a human thing. Modesty. We don't usually stand around half naked in front of strangers. I heard her move, the soft sound of her bare feet against the deck. How inefficient, she mused. The body is a primary data source. Why would you hide the most honest part of your existence? Because we're repressed and we like our privacy, I snapped, trying to regain some semblance of my usual cynicism. Look, XY, can I call you XY? Let's just set some ground rules. Knock before you come out of the bathroom, and maybe wear something that covers more than 10% of your surface area. A soft, musical chime of laughter echoed behind me. You are quite quaint, meat man, but if it makes your internal sensors less agitated, I shall endeavor to accommodate your strange tribal customs. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing heart. I had come to the Zenith Ring to build a future, to escape the dirt and the darkness of the mines. I hadn't expected my biggest challenge to be a 2-meter-tall glowing alien who thought clothes were a suggestion. Right, I said, still talking to the wall. Welcome to the Academy. This is going to be a long 4 years. The first week at the Zenith Ring was a blur of high-intensity lectures and the constant, gnawing feeling that I was out of my depth. While the other students were discussing the finer points of non-Euclidean geometry, I was still trying to figure out how to operate the station's touchless interface without accidentally ordering a 3-course meal or venting the room's atmosphere. Xylanthia, on the other hand, seemed to exist in a state of perpetual, elegant boredom. She was studying xenobiology and diplomatic theory, though she spent most of her time staring out the viewport at the stars, her skin shifting through shades of deep violet and navy blue. We lived in a state of uneasy truce. I kept my head down, buried in my schematics, and she continued to treat our shared room like her personal sanctuary, often forgetting that humans had a biological need for personal space. You are staring at that glowing rectangle again, she remarked one evening, lounging on her bed in a garment that appeared to be woven from starlight and gossamer. Your brainwaves are emitting a scent of frustration. It smells like burnt copper. It's called studying, Xi, I grunted, rubbing my eyes. If I don't master the fluid dynamics of kinetic joints by tomorrow, I'm going to wash out of the program. I can't go back to the pits. I won't. She drifted over to my desk, her presence bringing that rain-on-asphalt scent with her. She leaned over my shoulder, her large golden eyes scanning my display. Your math is archaic. You're trying to solve for friction when you should be solving for harmonic resonance. The metal isn't a solid, it's a song. Easy for you to say. Your people probably have computers in your teeth, I muttered. We do not have computers in our teeth, she said, her voice dropping to a lower, more resonant frequency. We simply see the world as it is, not as a collection of parts, but as a flow of energy. You humans are so busy trying to categorize the void that you forget to feel it. Before I could respond, the station's lights flickered and died. A low-frequency groan vibrated through the floorboards, the sound of heavy machinery grinding to a halt. Attention residents of Sector 9G, a calm, synthetic voice announced over the emergency speakers. A localized malfunction in the water reclamation grid has been detected. Gravity and life support remain stable, but all automated sanitation systems are offline. Please utilize the manual backup facilities until further notice. I groaned, leaning back in my chair. Fantastic. A 1 billion credit station, and we're back to using buckets like it's the Dark Ages. Manual facilities? Xylanthia asked, her skin flickering with curiosity. Is this another of your quaint human rituals? It means the sonic showers are dead, XI. If we want to get clean, we have to use the old-school water tubs in the storage lockers. Actual water. Wet, heavy, and annoying. She tilted her head. I have read of this. Hydration-based cleansing. It sounds tactile. I waited until she left for her late-night seminar on galactic law before I dragged the collapsible tub out of the storage unit. I was exhausted. My skin felt like it was coated in a layer of invisible dust, and the thought of actual hot water was too tempting to resist. The tub was small, designed for emergency use, and filling it with the hand pump took 20 minutes of back-breaking effort. I added a dash of cleaning solution, stripped off my grease-stained coveralls, and sank into the warmth with a long, ragged sigh. For a moment, I was at peace. The red emergency lights cast long, soft shadows across the room, and the silence of the station was absolute. I closed my eyes, letting the heat soak into my aching muscles. I was Cyprian Vane, kinetic architect in training. I was going to be someone. I was going to... The door chimed. My eyes snapped open. The door to our room didn't just chime, it slid open. Cyprian? The seminar was canceled. The professor's translator suffered a short circuit and began speaking in ancient trade dialect. Zenithia froze in the doorway. Time didn't just slow down, it curdled. I was sitting in a tub that was far too small for me, water splashing over the sides, my knees pulled up to my chest, and I was, quite literally, stark naked. I didn't move. I couldn't. I felt like a deer caught in the high beams of a heavy lifter. Zenithia didn't look away. She didn't gasp, she didn't blush, and she certainly didn't apologize. Instead, her golden eyes widened, the pupils, which were usually just thin slits, expanding until they nearly filled the orbs. She stepped closer, her bare feet silent on the deck. Her skin began to pulse with an intense, brilliant white light, a rhythm that matched the frantic thudding of my heart. She looked at my face, then her gaze traveled slowly, agonizingly, down the length of my body. She lingered on the scars on my shoulders from the mine collapses, the corded muscle of my thighs, and other places. Then she did it. Her tongue, longer than a human's, pointed and tinted a deep royal purple, slid out of her mouth. She licked her lower lip in a slow, deliberate motion, her gaze never leaving mine. It wasn't a gesture of hunger, it was a gesture of intense, analytical focus. Fascinating, she whispered, and the sound made my teeth ache with a strange, pleasant vibration. Your thermal signature is radiant. I can see the blood pumping through your vessels. It creates a map of heat that is quite exquisite. See, I croaked, my voice sounding like I'd swallowed a handful of gravel. Get out. She didn't move. She leaned in closer until I could feel the heat radiating from her skin. Why? You are beautiful in this light, meat man, like a star being born in the dark. My people believe that the soul is written in the heat of the blood. I am simply reading you. She licked her lips again, her tongue flickering like a snake's, tasting the air between us. You're not reading me, you're creeping me out, I yelled, finally regaining my motor functions. I grabbed a nearby towel, which was pathetically small, and tried to cover myself while simultaneously attempting to stand up in a slippery tub. It went about as well as you'd expect. My foot slipped, I windmilled my arms, and I went crashing out of the tub, landing in a heap of wet limbs and bruised dignity at her feet. Zenithia looked down at me, her expression one of mild alien amusement. Your coordination is as archaic as your mathematics, Cyprian Vane, but your emotional state, it is shimmering. I'm embarrassed. I'm angry. I'm probably going to die of a heart attack. I scrambled to my feet, wrapping the towel around my waist and backing away until I hit the viewport. She straightened up, her skin dimming to a soft, pearlescent glow. In my culture, when one reveals their true form so openly, it is considered a declaration of intent, a gesture of supreme trust. It wasn't a gesture. It was a plumbing failure. She smiled, a slow, dangerous expression that made me realize just how little I knew about the woman I was sharing a room with. Perhaps, but my sensors do not lie. Your heart rate is elevated. Your pheromone output is spiking. You are uncomfortable, yes, but you are also attracted. I am not, I started, then stopped, because I was. I was a 25-year-old man, and she was the most incredible thing I'd ever seen, even if she did think I was a glorified piece of meat. Don't worry, she said, turning toward her sleeping pod. I shall not hold your human modesty against you, but I should warn you, Cyprian. Oculons have perfect memory. I have etched this thermal map into my core. I will see you like this every time I close my eyes. She climbed into her pod and pulled the shimmering cover over herself, leaving me standing, shivering in the dark, clutching a wet towel and wondering how the hell I was supposed to survive the rest of the semester. Good night, meat man. Her voice drifted out from the darkness. Night, Z, I muttered, my heart still trying to hammer its way out of my chest. I looked out the viewport at the stars. They looked colder than they had an hour ago. Or maybe I was just starting to realize that in this vast glowing galaxy, I was the one who was truly alien. The morning after the thermal incident was as quiet as a vacuum. I woke up to the soft rhythmic hum of the Zenith Ring's internal gyro stabilizers, a sound that usually grounded me, but today felt like it was mocking the chaotic thumping of my heart. I lay in my sleeping pod, staring at the translucent ceiling, trying to convince myself that I hadn't just spent the previous night being analyzed like a side of prime beef by a 2-meter-tall alien princess. Zelanthia was already up. I could hear the faint melodic chiming of her crystalline shards as she moved them across the shared desk. It was a strange habit of hers, a form of meditation or perhaps just a way to organize her thoughts. To my human eyes, they were just rocks. To her, they were probably a library. I rolled out of the pod, making sure my towel was fastened with the kind of reinforced security usually reserved for hull plating. I didn't say a word. I just headed for the kitchenette, my boots clicking against the polished deck. "The scent of your skin has changed again, meat man," she said without turning around. Her skin was a pale, misty violet this morning, a color I was beginning to associate with the early hours of the station's cycle. The spike of adrenaline from last night has subsided, replaced by a lingering trace of, what is the word? Contrition? "It's called being awkward, Sci," I muttered, slamming a cartridge of low-grade caffeine into the brewer. "And for the love of the stars, stop sniffing me. It's creepy as hell." She turned then, her golden eyes shimmering with a light that seemed to pierce right through my thermal layers. "You humans have such thin skin, literally and figuratively. Why do you struggle against the obvious? We are biological entities. We radiate data. Ignoring it won't make it go away." "Yeah, well, we also have something called personal boundaries," I said, taking a long, scorching sip of the caffeine. It tasted like battery acid and regret, but it was exactly what I needed to jumpstart my brain. In the mines, if you got too close to another man's gear without asking, you ended up with a broken jaw. It's about respect. Silanthia stood up, her long, elegant form casting a shadow that stretched halfway across the room. "Respect, an interesting concept. You define it as distance. My people define it as clarity. To see a person as they truly are, without the filters of cloth and artifice, is the highest form of honor." "Well, you honored me plenty last night," I grunted. "Now, can we please talk about something else? Like the fact that I have a midterm on kinetic stress testing in 2 hours, and I can barely remember how to calculate a load-bearing arc." She drifted toward me, her presence making the tiny kitchen feel even smaller. "You are worrying about the wrong things, Cyprian Vane. You possess a remarkable talent for understanding the physical world, yet you treat your own nature like a defect. Your math is correct, but your spirit is out of tune." I looked at her, really looked at her, and for a moment, the sarcasm died in my throat. Despite the glowing skin and the pupilless eyes, there was a loneliness in her expression that I recognized. It was the same look I'd seen in the mirror after 3 years in the slag pits. The look of someone who didn't belong in the world they were forced to inhabit. "Look," I said, my voice softening, "I'm just a guy trying to make it out of the dirt. I don't have the luxury of worrying about harmonic resonance or whatever you call it. I just need to pass." Before she could respond, my cortex link pulsed against my temple. A notification flared in my vision. "External surveillance detected. Sector 9G, Room 42. I froze. The cortex link was a piece of junk I'd salvaged from a scrapped crawler, but it was programmed to detect unauthorized pings from the station's security grid. Someone wasn't just watching the halls. They were trying to peek through our door's encryption. "We've got static," I whispered, my street slang slipping out reflexively. Silanthia's skin flared a sharp, defensive white. "Static? Explain." "Someone's ghosting our room," I said, moving quickly to the desk and tapping into the local network. "Unauthorized data pings. They're trying to crack the room's internal sensor log. They want to see what's happening in here." Silanthia's eyes narrowed, the gold turning to a deep, molten amber. "The iron thalassocracy. They are more persistent than I anticipated." "The who?" I asked, my fingers flying across the holographic keyboard as I tried to reinforce the firewalls. I thought you said you were just a student. I am a student of many things, she said, her voice dropping to that resonant frequency that made the air vibrate. But I am also a liability. My house, the house of Ethelgard, possesses biological sequences that the thalassocracy desires for their own ends. They do not see me as a person, Cyprian. They see me as a map, a key to gates they should never open. Great, I muttered, finally managing to block the ping. I'm sharing a room with a walking classified document. I knew this scholarship was too good to be true. You should leave, she said, her light dimming to a sorrowful gray. If you are found to be harboring me, the consequences will be severe. They do not take prisoners, meat man. They only take assets. I looked at the door, then back at her. Every survival instinct I'd honed in the tunnels was screaming at me to grab my bag and bug out. I could find another room, maybe even another station. I didn't owe this alien girl anything. We were roommates by accident, not by choice. But then I thought about the way she'd looked at me in the tub. Not with lust, but with a kind of desperate curiosity, as if she were trying to find something human in herself by studying me. I thought about the way she'd laughed at my stupid human modesty. I've spent 25 years running from the mines, I said, standing tall. I'm tired of running. Besides, who else is going to keep you from walking around the station in your birthday suit? Zelanthia blinked, her light flickering with a strange shimmering rhythm. You would stay, even knowing the danger? I'm a gearhead, Shy. I fix things. And right now, this situation is broken as hell. I'm not leaving until it's sorted. She reached out, her fingers, long and cool, touching my arm. The electric tingle I'd felt before returned, stronger this time, a surge of energy that felt like it was trying to sync with my own heartbeat. You are a strange life form, Cyprian Vane, she whispered, but perhaps there is wisdom in your stubbornness. Don't get sentimental on me, I said, pulling away and heading for my locker. I've still got that exam, and if the thalassocracy tries to kick in our door while I'm gone, make sure you're wearing something with armor plating, or at least something that doesn't require a towel. As I stepped out into the corridor, I felt a heavy weight in my gut. I wasn't just an engineering student anymore. I was an accomplice. And in a place like the Zenith Ring, being an accomplice usually ended with a one-way trip through an airlock. I headed for the lecture hall, my mind racing. I needed to know more about this iron thalassocracy. If they were as bad as Zelanthia said, the station's security wouldn't protect us. In fact, they might already be on the payroll. The lecture hall was a massive, tiered theater, filled with hundreds of students from across the hegemony. I found a seat in the back, away from the prying eyes of the drones. The professor, a spindly, four-armed scholar from the Sylvanus cluster, was droning on about the structural integrity of carbon nanotube lattices. I wasn't listening. I was busy using my Cortex link to dive into the station's dark web archives. It was a risky move. If I got caught, it was an automatic expulsion. But I needed answers. Iron thalassocracy, a splinter faction of the Oculon hegemony. Known for their mastery of bioengineering and their aggressive expansionist policies, led by High Archon Valerius, currently embroiled in a succession dispute with the House of Ethelgard. The pieces started to fall into place. Zelanthia wasn't just a princess, she was a refugee. And if she was the key to some biological secret, she was the most valuable prize in the galaxy. Mr. Vane, I jumped, my Cortex link flickering as I snapped back to reality. The professor was staring at me, all four of his arms crossed over his chest. Since you seem so preoccupied with your internal thoughts, perhaps you can tell the class the minimum load-bearing capacity of a 3-meter-thick kinetic joint in zero gravity? I didn't even have to think about it. 7 years of keeping tunnel rigs from collapsing on my head had burned those numbers into my brain. 150,000 metric tons, provided the dampeners are set to a frequency of 12 hertz, I said, my voice steady. But if you're using the newer Mark IV alloys, you can push it to 200,000 before you see any structural fatigue. The professor blinked, his multiple eyes narrowing in surprise. Correct. Unexpectedly so. Perhaps you should spend more time studying and less time Whatever it is you were doing. I sank back into my seat, a cold sweat breaking out on my neck. I wasn't just a student, I was a target, and I had the feeling that before the day was over, my knowledge of load-bearing capacities was going to be tested in a way that had nothing to do with architecture. When the lecture finally ended, I didn't head back to the room. Instead, I made a detour to the lower maintenance levels. I needed tools, not the fancy high-tech scanners the Academy provided, but the gritty, illegal stuff you could only find in the gut of the station. I found what I was looking for in a dimly lit workshop tucked behind a series of massive cooling vents. The shop was run by a grizzled cyborg named Bax, a man who had more metal in him than flesh. "Cyprian," Bax grunted, not looking up from a mangled power core. "Heard you made it into the Zenith. Thought you'd be too busy sipping nectar with the royals to visit the dirty work boys." "Need a favor, Bax," I said, tossing a handful of credits onto the table. "I need a localized jammer, something that can scramble bioscans within a 10-meter radius." Bax looked at the credits, then at me. "That's heavy gear, kid. You looking to hide a body or just your own scent?" "Neither. Just want some privacy. The neighbors are a bit too curious." Bax let out a raspy laugh. "Privacy on the Zenith. That's a good one. All right, I've got an old military-grade scrambler. It's clunky, and it'll eat through a power cell in 2 hours, but it'll turn your biosignature into static. I'll take it." As I left the maintenance level with the jammer tucked into my duffel, I felt a slight shift in the station's gravity. It was subtle, but for a man who lived by the vibrations of the deck, it was as loud as a scream. The Zenith Ring wasn't just rotating, it was reconfiguring. I checked my comms, no alerts, no announcements. The station was being moved manually, redirected by someone who didn't want the passengers to know. "Time to go," I whispered, my heart rate accelerating. I ran. I didn't care who saw me. I bypassed the elevators and took the emergency ladders, my boots clanging against the metal in a frantic rhythm. I had to get back to room 42. I had to get to Xylanthia, because if the station was moving, it meant the hunters weren't just outside anymore. They were already here. I reached our sector just as the emergency lights flared a deep warning red. The air was thick with the scent of ozone, but there was something else underneath it. Something sharp and chemical, like the smell of a neurogas being vented into the corridors. "Shy!" I shouted, slamming my palm against the door's scanner. The door didn't move. The interface was dead, the screen shattered by a high-energy pulse. Someone had hard-locked the room from the inside. "Cyprian!" Her voice came through the thick plating, muffled but clear. "Stay away! They have breached the viewport!" I didn't listen. I couldn't. I pulled the heavy-duty kinetic wrench from my duffel and jammed it into the manual override slot at the base of the door. I put every ounce of my mind-hardened muscle into the turn, the metal groaning as I forced the gears to move. "Come on, you piece of junk!" I hissed, my face turning purple from the effort. "Move!" With a scream of protesting metal, the door lurched open a few inches. I dropped the wrench and squeezed through the gap, stumbling into the room just as a blinding flash of white light erupted from the viewport. Xylanthia was in the center of the room, her skin blazing with a light so intense I had to shield my eyes. She was facing 3 figures clad in sleek, matte black armor, thalassocracy enforcers. They weren't using blasters, they were using containment webs, shimmering strands of energy designed to paralyze oculon physiology. "Back off!" I yelled, swinging my duffel bag like a flail. The heavy jammer inside connected with the lead enforcer's helmet, sending him sprawling across the deck. The other 2 spun around, their helmets' optical sensors glowing a menacing red. One of them raised a stun baton, but Xylanthia was faster. She moved with a fluidity that shouldn't have been possible for a being of her size, her hand striking the enforcer's chest with a pulse of brilliant blue energy. He flew backward, slamming into the workstation and shattering the crystalline shards she'd been meditating over. "Cyprian, get down!" she screamed. I dived behind the sleeping pod as the 3rd enforcer fired a containment web. The energy strands sizzled through the air where I'd been standing a second ago, melting the surface of the desk. "You are coming with us, Princess," the lead enforcer growled, his voice distorted by his helmet's speakers. "The High Archon does not like to be kept waiting. Your blood is required." "My blood is my own," Zelanthia spat, her light pulsing in a jagged, violent pattern. I will not be a tool for your genocidal dreams. I saw my opening. The lead enforcer was focused on Swai, his back turned to me. I grabbed a piece of the shattered desk, a heavy carbon composite shard, and lunged. I didn't aim for the armor. I aimed for the flexible joint at the back of his knee. The shard sank deep into the synthetic mesh, and the enforcer let out a roar of pain, his leg buckling beneath him. You miserable meat-eater, he hissed, turning his stun baton toward me. But Silanthia was already there. She grabbed his arm with a strength that made the metal plating groan. Her eyes were no longer gold. They were a blinding, incandescent white. Do not touch him. She twisted his arm until the joint snapped, then threw him against the wall with enough force to dent the hull plating. The three enforcers lay incapacitated, their armor smoking from her energy strikes. We have to move, I panted, grabbing her hand. The station's moving, Eggsy. They've got control of the navigation deck. She looked at me, her light slowly dimming back to a soft violet. She was breathing hard, her skin translucent enough that I could see her internal organs pulsing with light. I have done something, Cyprian, she whispered, her voice trembling. The incident in the tub. The lick. It was not just a scan. I froze, my hand still gripping hers. What are you talking about? Among my people, the lick is the final step of a biological evaluation, she said, her golden eyes searching mine. When I tasted your skin, I was not just measuring your heat. I was seeding your DNA with my own pheromonal markers. You did what? I asked, my brain trying to process the implications. You tagged me like a stray cat? No, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. I initiated a bonding protocol. It is a defense mechanism. In times of extreme danger, an oculon of my lineage can bind their life signature to another being. It creates a symbiotic loop. My energy sustains you, and your biology stabilizes me. I looked down at my hand. The electric tingle I'd felt wasn't just my imagination. It was the bond. I could feel her heart beating as if it were my own, a steady rhythmic hum that was beginning to overwrite the frantic rhythm of my human pulse. So what does that mean for me? I asked, my voice barely audible. It means that as long as I live, you will possess strength beyond your species. You will see what I see. But it also means that the thalassocracy can track you as easily as they track me. You are no longer just an observer, Cyprian. You are part of the House of Ethelgard. Terrific, I muttered. Though strangely, I wasn't as angry as I should have been. The bond felt right. It felt like a piece of my soul that had been missing since the mines had finally found its place. So we're stuck together. Forever? Until death, she said, her light shimmering with a sudden, intense warmth. Is that acceptable to you, meat man? I looked at the incapacitated enforcers, then at the viewport where the stars were beginning to blur as the station accelerated. I looked at the alien woman who had just bound her life to mine, a being of starlight and mystery who saw beauty in my grease-stained hands. I've had worse roommates, I said, a small, crooked smile playing on my lips. Let's get out of here before more of these goons show up. We moved through the station like ghosts, our synchronized movements allowing us to bypass security patrols with an efficiency that would have been impossible an hour ago. I could feel Xylanthia's thoughts drifting into mine, fragments of memories, flashes of silver moons, and oceans of liquid light. It was overwhelming, but it was also beautiful. We reached the secondary docking bays, a labyrinth of cargo containers and heavy lifting cranes. This was my world, the gritty, industrial heart of the Zenith Ring. We need a ship, I said, eyeing a row of short-range couriers. Something fast, something that doesn't require a clearance code. There! Zelanthia pointed to a battered matte black vessel tucked into a corner of the bay. It was a blockade runner, old but well-maintained, with its transponder already scrambled. That's a smuggler's ship, I said, recognizing the modifications. Whose is it? Mine, a voice called out from the shadows. A figure emerged from behind a stack of crates. He was a human, but his skin was a patchwork of scars and cybernetic implants. He wore a long, tattered coat and carried a pulse rifle with the casual ease of a man who had seen too many wars. Rook, I said, recognizing the name from the maintenance levels. He was a legend among the station's underworld, a man who could get anything anywhere for the right price. Cyprian? Rook grunted, his cybernetic eye whirring as it scanned us. I see you've upgraded your roommate. A bit high maintenance, isn't she? We need out, Rook, I said, stepping forward. The thalassocracy is crawling all over the station. They've already breached our room. Rook looked at Xylanthia, his expression unreadable. I know. My sensors picked up the station's shift 10 minutes ago. They're taking the Zenith into deeper space, away from the hegemony's jurisdiction. Once they get clear, they'll purge the station until they find her. Can you get us clear? Xylanthia asked, her light pulsing with a desperate hope. Rook spat on the deck. It'll cost you more than just credits. If I take you, I'm an enemy of the thalassocracy for life, and they have very long memories. I have something better than credits, Xylanthia said, reaching into the folds of her garment and producing a single pulsing crystal, the largest and brightest I'd seen. This is a core shard from the Ethelgard archives. It contains the navigational coordinates to the lost vaults of Cryos. It is worth more than this entire station. Rook's cybernetic eye widened. He looked at the crystal, then at Zoe, then at me. You're serious, he whispered. As a heart attack, I said. Take us out, Rook, before the High Archon decides he wants a human trophy to go with his princess. Rook holstered his rifle and jerked his head toward the ship. Get aboard. We launch in 2 minutes. And kid, try not to puke on the upholstery. It's antique. As we scrambled into the ship's cramped cabin, I felt a sudden, sharp pang in my chest. The bond was reacting to our distance from the station's power core. Xylanthia was already at the co-pilot's seat, her fingers dancing across the alien-modified controls. Cyprian, she said without looking back, the bridge between us, it is strengthening. Can you feel it? I sat in the engineer's seat, my hands finding the familiar levers and dials of the power grid. I feel it, Cy. It feels like home. The ship's engines roared to life, a deep, guttural vibration that I felt in my bones. Rook slammed the throttles forward, and the blockade runner lurched through the docking bay's force field, plunging into the silent void. Behind us, the Zenith Ring looked like a dying ember in the dark, a monument to a life I was leaving behind. I didn't know where we were going, and I didn't know if we'd survive the night. But as I looked at the glowing woman beside me, I realized that for the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving, I was living. Buckle up, meat man, Rook shouted over the roar of the engines. We're about to jump. The stars stretched into long, brilliant lines of light, and the world dissolved into the shimmering chaos of hyperspace. I closed my eyes, letting the bond carry me through the darkness, one heartbeat at a time. We were gone. We were fugitives. We were bonded. And God help anyone who tried to stand in our way. The transition from hyperspace back into real time was always a gut punch, but with a neural bond tethered to an Oculon princess, it felt like being dragged through a sieve made of liquid neon. I gasped, my lungs burning as if I were back in the deep-bore shafts of Velonis Prime, where the air was more dust than oxygen. My vision flared with colors that didn't have names in the human lexicon, shades of ultraviolet that screamed in infrared tones that felt like a warm, heavy blanket. Easy, meat man, Rook's voice grunted from the pilot's seat. He didn't look back, his cybernetic fingers dancing across a console that looked like it had been salvaged from 3 different shipwrecks and held together by sheer spite. The first jump with a sync link is a real kicker, usually leaves people seeing sideways for an hour. I'm fine, I lied, though my hand was trembling as I gripped the armrest. I could feel Xylanthia's presence in the back of my mind, a steady, rhythmic hum that was currently radiating a mix of guilt and intense concentration. You are not fine, Cyprian Vane, Xylanthia said. She was seated in the auxiliary chair, her skin a dull, bruised indigo. The strain of the escape and the activation of the bonding protocol had clearly taken a toll on her. Your internal temperature is fluctuating. Your biology is fighting the energy I have shared with you. It is like trying to pour a sun into a clay pot. Better a hot pot than a cold corpse, I snapped, then immediately regretted the tone. The bond hummed with a sharp sting of hurt from her side, and I winced. Sorry, it's a lot to take in. One day I'm calculating load-bearing arcs for a midterm, and the next I'm a biological battery for a royal fugitive. Rook let out a raspy, metallic chuckle. Welcome to the real galaxy, kid. The Academy is just a pretty lie they tell the high-bloods to keep them from realizing the rest of us are out here eating dirt. Speaking of dirt, we're coming up on Vesta 6. Keep your eyes peeled and your burners hot. This place makes the slag pits look like a luxury resort. Through the viewport, Vesta 6 loomed out of the darkness. It wasn't a planet so much as a celestial graveyard, a massive moon made entirely of tectonic junk and abandoned space hulks, all trapped in the gravitational pull of a dying gas giant. It was a haven for smugglers, scrap dealers, and people who had very good reasons for staying off the hegemony's long-range sensors. As we descended, the Void Rat, Rook's ship, shuddered under the stress of the lunar atmosphere. I could feel every groan of the hull through the bond. It was as if Zelanthia and the ship were becoming part of the same sensory loop. I need to check the power grid, I said, standing up on shaky legs. The starboard thrusters are coughing. Sounds like a fuel line obstruction. Go on then, gearhead. Rook waved me off. Just don't trip over the wiring. This ship has a temper. I made my way to the engineering crawl space, glad for the distraction. Working with machines was honest. You knew where the bolts went, and you knew exactly how much pressure a pipe could take before it burst. People, especially alien ones with glowing skin, were a lot harder to calibrate. I was elbow deep in the primary coolant manifold when Zylanthia drifted into the cramped space. Her bioluminescence was low, casting long, soft shadows against the greasy walls. You are hiding, Cyprian, she said softly. I'm fixing, I corrected, not looking up. There's a difference. Is there? You seek comfort in the predictable nature of metal because you fear the unpredictability of what we have become. She moved closer, her scent of rain on asphalt filling the small compartment. I can feel your doubt. It tastes like cold ash. I dropped the wrench, the clang echoing through the ship. I turned to face her, the space between us so tight that I could see the faint, rhythmic pulsing of the cerulean light beneath her throat. You're damn right I'm doubting, see, I whispered. You tagged me. You didn't ask. You didn't explain. You just rewrote my DNA. What happens to me if you get captured? What happens if you die? Am I just a casualty of your defense protocol? Zelanthia's eyes swirled with a deep, sorrowful amber. She reached out, her hand hesitating before brushing against my cheek. The contact was electric, a surge of warmth that made my breath catch. In my world, the bond is the ultimate expression of trust, she said. I did not choose you because you were convenient. I chose you because your thermal signature was the only thing in that station that felt solid. You were the only one who didn't look at me like a prize or a problem. You looked at me like a person. And now I'm a target, I said, though the anger was starting to drain out of me, replaced by a weary sort of acceptance. Yes, she admitted, and for that I will carry the weight of 1,000 suns. But the bond is not just a one-way siphon, Cyprian. It is a bridge. My strength is yours, my memory is yours. If the thalassocracy comes, they will find that the meat man has the heart of an Oculon warrior. Great, I muttered, leaning my head against the cold metal of the manifold. I always wanted to be a biological anomaly. It'll look great on my resume. Hey, lovebirds, Rook's voice boomed over the internal comms. Strap in. We're hitting the scrap fields. It's about to get bumpy. I grabbed Zelanthia's hand, pulling her toward the jump seats. As the Void Rat banked sharply, dodging a massive chunk of an old freighter, I felt a sudden, sharp spike of pain in the bond. It wasn't mine. It was Zelanthia's. She let out a strangled cry, her skin flashing a brilliant, jagged red. Swy! What is it? Someone... She gasped, her eyes wide and unfocused. Someone is... screaming. Not with a voice. With the light. Rook, we've got a problem, I yelled toward the cockpit. I see it, Rook shouted back. We've got company. 2 hounds on our tail. Thalassocracy scout ships. They must have been ghosting Vesta 6, waiting for a signature match. I looked at Zelanthia. She was trembling, her hands clutching at her head. They are. Using a resonance harvester. They have someone, Cyprian, one of my people. They are using their light to scan for me. The horror of it hit me like a physical blow. A resonance harvester was a piece of forbidden tech that literally drained the biological energy out of an oculon to create a high-powered tracking beam. It was a slow, agonizing death. "We can't just leave them," Zelanthia whispered, her golden eyes pleading with mine. "We're in a scrap bucket, see?" Rook roared as a blast of plasma shook the ship. "We can't take on 2 hounds and a harvester rig. My job is to get you out, not play hero." "Rook, if they have a harvester, they won't stop until they find us," I said, my mind racing through the technical specs of the Void Rat. "The scrambler won't work against a biological lock. Our only chance is to take out that rig." "You're insane, kid," Rook grunted, but I could see his cybernetic eye whirring as he calculated the odds. "I like you, but I'm not dying for a noble cause." "It's not a noble cause, it's physics," I shouted, climbing into the engineering station. "If we dump the coolant into the exhaust manifolds, we can create a thermal bloom that'll blind their harvester for 10 seconds. That's all the time you'll need to get behind them." "And what happens to my engines when you dump the coolant?" "They'll run hot as hell, but they won't melt. Not for 10 seconds. I can override the safeties." Rook was silent for a heartbeat, then he slammed a fist against the console. "Fine, but if my ship turns into a fireball, I'm haunting your ghost. Princess, get to the gunner seat. You're the only one who can see their heat sigs through the scrap." Xylanthia nodded, her indigo skin shifting back to a determined, bright cerulean. She scrambled toward the turret controls, her movements graceful even in the middle of a dogfight. "Cyprian," she said through the bond, her voice a steady anchor in my mind. "I am ready." "On my mark," I said, my fingers hovering over the manual override. I could feel the heat of the engines rising, the vibration of the ship intensifying. I could feel Zelanthia's focus, her vision merging with mine until I could see the 2 thalassocracy ships as bright, angry flares in the darkness. 3, 2, 1, dump it! I slammed the levers forward. A massive cloud of superheated gas erupted from the Void Rat, creating a blinding, white-hot explosion of thermal energy in our wake. The harvester beam flickered and died, the tracking lock shattered by the interference. "Now!" I screamed. Rook pulled the ship into a tight, sickening roll, the inertial dampeners groaning as we looped behind the lead hound. "I have them," Zelanthia whispered. The ship's pulse cannons roared, 3 perfectly aimed shots tearing through the hound's unshielded engines. The ship drifted, spinning out of control into a massive pile of tectonic junk. "One down!" Rook yelled. "But the harvester rig is powering up again. We need to move." "Target the rig's emitter," I told Zelanthia. "If you can crack the housing, the energy will backflow. It'll shut them down for good." "I see the weak point," she replied, "but I need more power. Cyprian, give me everything." I didn't hesitate. I reached out through the bond, opening the gates of my own adrenaline, my own stubborn human will. I felt a surge of energy move through me, a white-hot spark that traveled from my heart, through my arm, and into her. Silanthia's skin erupted in a light so brilliant it illuminated the entire cabin. She fired. A single concentrated beam of cerulean energy struck the harvester rig's emitter. For a second, nothing happened. Then, the rig blossomed into a magnificent violet explosion, the resonance backwash scattering the remaining hound ship like a leaf in a storm. Silence fell over the Void Rat. The only sound was the heavy, ragged breathing of 3 survivors and the soft, ticking cooling of the engines. Did we do it?" I gasped, slumped over the engineering console. "Yeah, kid," Rook said, his voice unusually quiet. "We did it, but we just rang a bell that every hunter in the sector heard. We need to land. Now." We touched down on a jagged plateau on the outskirts of the Vesta 6 scrap market. As the boarding ramp lowered, the smell of grease, rust, and desperate living drifted in. It was a harsh, ugly place, but to me, it felt like the safest spot in the galaxy. Zelanthia stepped out of the gunner seat, her light dim and flickering. She looked at her hands, then at me. "You gave me your strength," she whispered. "I felt it. It was heavy, like the earth itself." "That's just the dust eater in me, see," I said, trying to force a smile. "We humans might not have fancy lights, but we're pretty good at holding on when things get rough." She walked toward me, her golden eyes searching mine with a new kind of intensity. It was more than that. You chose to share the burden. You did not have to. The bond would have taken it regardless. But you gave it freely. I guess I'm starting to learn the house rules, I said, reaching out to steady her. But as we walked out into the flickering lights of the Vesta 6 market, the bond hummed with a new dark sensation. It was a sense of dread, deep and cold. The turning point hadn't just been the fight. It had been the realization that by saving Xylanthia, I had truly become her shadow. And in the underworld of Vesta 6, shadows were the first thing people looked to sell. Vesta 6 was a symphony of industrial decay. The market, known as the Hollow Walk, was a series of tunnels carved into the side of a massive, decommissioned dreadnought. Neon signs in 5 different languages flickered against walls weeping with oily condensation. The air was a thick soup of recycled oxygen, cheap street food, and the metallic tang of scrap welding. "Keep your hoods up and your eyes down," Rook warned, his pulse rifle slung low over his shoulder. "In this place, being interesting is a death sentence. Princess, try to keep your glow to a minimum. If someone thinks you're a high-grade energy source, they'll try to plug you into a generator." Xylanthia pulled her cloak tighter, her skin dulling to a muted pearly gray. "The air here, it feels heavy with sorrow, Rook. I can feel the resonance of so many broken things." "That's just the smell of poverty, Z," I said, my hand resting on the hilt of my kinetic wrench. "It's the same on every frontier moon. People come here to disappear, but the moon usually finds a way to keep them." We moved through the crowded tunnels, dodging a group of 4-armed dock workers and a pair of shivering stimatics. I was hyper-aware of everything: the way a merchant stared at us too long, the rhythmic click of a security drone overhead, the subtle fluctuations in Xylanthia's light. The bond was making me paranoid, heightening my senses until I could feel the vibrations of the entire moon through the soles of my boots. Rook led us to a back-alley tavern called the Rusty Bolt. It was a dive, filled with the kind of people who looked like they'd sell their own mothers for a handful of credits. "Wait here," Rook said, gesturing to a dark corner booth. "I need to talk to a contact. He's got the specs on the thalassocracy's movement in this sector. If we're lucky, we can find a hole in their blockade." "And if we're not lucky," I asked, "then I hope you're good at holding your breath, because we'll be skimming the void for a long time." Rook disappeared into the crowd, leaving Xylanthia and me alone in the shadows. I watched her as she stared at the table, her long fingers tracing the deep gouges in the wood. "You are thinking about the harvester," I said quietly. She looked up, her golden eyes clouded with a pain I could feel as a dull ache in my own chest. "They were using them, Cyprian. My people. They were being turned into fuel. How can a civilization fall so far? How can we do this to our own kind?" "Power does strange things to people, Sci," I said, thinking of the mining guild bosses back on Velonis, who would let a tunnel collapse rather than lose an hour of production. "It makes them see others as tools instead of lives. Once you start seeing someone as a resource, the rest is just math." "Is that how you see me? As a resource?" The question caught me off guard. I looked at her, at the elegance of her features, the tragic beauty of her light, and the way she looked at me like I was the only thing holding her together. "No," I said, and for the first time, I didn't have to think about the answer. "I see you as a giant pain in the neck who won't let me study my calculus in peace. But I also see you as someone who deserves better than being a fuel cell." She reached across the table, her hand finding mine. The bond flared with a sudden, intense warmth, a feeling of pure, unadulterated gratitude that made my vision blur for a second. "Cyprian, Hey, look at this!" A voice cut through the air, loud and abrasive. I looked up to see a group of 3 bounty hunters, hounds out of uniform, standing by our booth. The leader was a massive, scarred human with a cybernetic jaw that clicked as he spoke. He was staring at Xylanthia with a predatory grin. "I thought I recognized that scent," the leader said, his voice a low growl. "Ethelgard royal blood. There's a bounty on her that could buy a dozen moons. And what have we here? A little human pet? You're a long way from home, kid." I stood up, my pulse accelerating. Through the bond, I felt Xylanthia's light flare into a defensive white. "We don't want any trouble. We're just passing through. Oh, you're passing through, all right, the leader laughed, reaching for his holster. Passing through my hands and into the High Archon's treasury. Ew. I didn't wait for him to draw. I lunged across the table, my kinetic wrench connecting with his cybernetic jaw with a satisfying crunch. The hunter flew backward, crashing into a table of startled patrons. Go, Z! Get out of here! I yelled. But the other two hunters were already on us. One of them, a wiry alien with multiple eyes, lunged for Xylanthia with a neural net. She ducked, her palm striking his chest and sending a pulse of blue energy through his armor. He collapsed, twitching as the energy scrambled his nervous system. The third hunter was more professional. He fired a stun blast that narrowly missed my head, the energy singeing the wall behind me. I dived behind the bar, grabbing a heavy glass bottle of some fermented rot gut. Cyprian! To your left! Xylanthia's voice screamed in my mind. I didn't think. I spun and threw the bottle at the hunter, emerging from the shadows. It shattered against his helmet, the liquid igniting as it hit his stun baton. He roared in pain as flames engulfed his arm. Let's go! I grabbed Xylanthia's hand and we sprinted for the exit. We burst out into the hollow walk, the sirens of the moon's security forces already wailing in the distance. We ran through the maze of tunnels, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Every corner felt like a trap, every shadow like a predator. This way! I pulled her into a narrow maintenance shaft, the air smelling of old grease and stagnant water. We scrambled down a series of ladders, descending deeper into the gut of Vesta 6. Finally, we reached a large open chamber filled with the husks of old ships, a scrapyard within a scrapyard. We need to hide, I panted, leaning against the hull of a rusted freighter. Rook will find us. He knows this moon better than anyone. Xylanthia was slumped against the wall, her light dim and flickering. She looked exhausted, her indigo skin almost translucent. Cyprian, she whispered, the bond. It is taking too much from you. I can feel your heart. It is struggling to keep up with the demand. I'm fine, Zai. I'm just a little winded. No, you are not. She stepped toward me, her golden eyes filled with a terrifying resolve. I can break the protocol. If I sever the connection now, my signature will be easier to track. But you will be free. You can find a way off this moon. You can go back to your academy. You can have the life you worked for. I looked at her, the reality of her words sinking in. She was offering me my life back, my safety, my dreams of being an engineer. All I had to do was let her walk away alone into a galaxy that wanted to turn her into a battery. Is that what you want? I asked, my voice trembling. For me to just walk away? I want you to live, she said, a single glowing tear tracking down her opal cheek. I have already taken so much from you. I cannot take your future as well. I thought about the mines. I thought about the cold, lonely years of scraping by, of dreaming of something more than dirt and darkness. I thought about the Zenith Ring and the bright, clean halls I'd so desperately wanted to belong to. Then I looked at Xylanthia. I looked at the way her light was the only thing that made this miserable scrap moon look like something beautiful. I realized that the life I'd worked for was just a goal, but what I had with her, this messy, dangerous, impossible connection, was a purpose. You're a real piece of work, you know that? I said, stepping closer until our foreheads touched. You think I stayed because of some biological protocol? You think I'm that easy to program? She blinked, her light flickering with confusion. But the bond, it compels. The bond didn't make me pick up that wrench, I snapped. The bond didn't make me jump into a tub with a 2-meter alien princess. I chose that. I chose you. And if you think I'm going to let some high and mighty enforcers take my roommate just because things got a little bumpy, then you really don't know humans at all. The bond erupted in a surge of emotion so powerful I nearly lost my footing. It wasn't just heat or light. It was an overwhelming sense of belonging, a resonance that transcended DNA and pheromones. It was the sound of 1,000 glass harps playing in perfect harmony. Xylanthia let out a sob, her arms wrapping around me, her skin blazing with a light that turned the dark scrapyard into a cathedral. I am sorry, she whispered into my neck. I am so sorry for doubting you. Forget it, I said, holding her tight. We're in this together, meat man and princess, to the end of the void. Well, that was a touching display, a dry, raspy voice said from the shadows. We spun around to see Rook standing near a pile of scrap metal, his cybernetic eye glowing softly. He looked worse for wear, his coat torn and his cheek bleeding, but he was still holding his rifle. Rook! I exhaled, the tension finally breaking. Did you get the specs? I got more than specs, kid, Rook said, his expression grim. I found out why the thalassocracy is so desperate to find her. It's not just about her bloodline. What is it? Zalanthia asked, her light turning a sharp, curious violet. They found a way to bridge the Oculon resonance with ancient precursor tech, Rook explained. If they get their hands on a royal blood like you, they can create a void scream, a weapon that can collapse an entire solar system's communication grid in an instant. They won't just expand, they'll shut down the galaxy. And once everyone is blind and deaf, they'll move in and take whatever's left. I looked at Xylanthia, the weight of the revelation settling over us like a shroud. This wasn't just about a marriage or a feud. It was about the fate of every living being in the hegemony. We can't let them have her, Rook, I said, my voice cold and determined. I know, Rook said, checking the power cell on his rifle. But there's a problem. My contact was a double agent. He sold us out to a group of drained ones. Oculon mercenaries who have been stripped of their light and live only for the hunt. They're already in the scrapyard, and they're not looking for a prize. They're looking for a kill. As if on cue, a low, guttural howl echoed through the scrapyard, a sound that was devoid of any light or melody. It was the sound of a void that had been hollowed out. They are here, Xylanthia whispered, her skin dimming to a fearful gray. I can feel the emptiness. It is like a hunger that never ends. All right, I said, gripping my wrench. Rook, give me a weapon. XY, get ready to see for all of us. If they want to fight in the dark, we'll give them a light they'll never forget. Ekona. We took our positions among the rusted hulks of the scrap moon. The turning point was behind us. The choice had been made. We weren't just running anymore. We were the last line of defense against a galaxy that was about to go silent. As the first of the drained ones emerged from the shadows, pallid, eyeless creatures with limbs that moved like broken clockwork, I felt the bond lock into place. One heart, two souls, and a whole lot of scrap metal. Let's show them how we do it in the pits, I whispered. The first drained one lunged, and the darkness of Vesta 6 exploded into a brilliant, defiant light. I used to think that freedom was about having no strings attached. I spent years in the mines of Velonis Prime dreaming of a life where I didn't owe anyone anything, where my only responsibility was the integrity of a weld or the torque of a bolt. I thought the academy would be my ticket to that kind of independence, a clean, sterile world where I could finally be Cyprian Vane, the architect. But standing in the belly of a scrap moon, bonded to a woman whose soul is literally woven into mine, I realized how wrong I was. Freedom isn't the absence of ties, it's the ability to choose which ties are worth dying for. For 25 years, I was just a ghost in the dust, surviving because I was too stubborn to quit. But Xylanthia, she didn't just give me energy. She gave me a reason to use it. I'm terrified. Every time our hearts sink, I feel the weight of 1,000 years of Oculon sorrow and the crushing pressure of a galaxy that wants to tear us apart. But I wouldn't trade it. I wouldn't go back to that quiet, lonely room at the Zenith Ring for all the credits in the hegemony. Because for the first time, I'm not just building structures for other people. I'm building a life. It's messy, it's dangerous, and it's probably going to kill me, but it's mine. We are a bridge, she said, and maybe that's the point. Maybe the only way to survive the void is to find someone to cross it with. The jump to the Creo system didn't feel like a voyage. It felt like a violation. Since Xylanthia had initiated the bonding protocol, the vacuum of space no longer seemed empty to me. It felt like a pressurized ocean of static, a roaring silence that vibrated through the marrow of my bones. As the void rat tore back into real space, the stars didn't just appear as points of light. They screamed in shades of deep indigo and burning gold, colors I was never meant to see. I slumped against the engineering console, my stomach performing a slow, sickening roll. My mouth tasted like I'd been chewing on a copper power cell. Get a grip, Vane, Rook grunted from the pilot's seat. His cybernetic eye was whirring at a frantic pace, scanning the frozen horizon of Krios Delta. We're in the thick of it now. This sector has been ghosted for 30 years. If the thalassocracy hasn't caught our scent yet, they will the second we put a foot on the ice. I'm with you, Rook, I wheezed, wiping a streak of cold sweat from my forehead. Just give me a minute to stop my brain from vibrating. I could feel Zelanthia behind me. She didn't need to speak. The bond was a live wire between us. Through it, I felt her awe, a towering, crystalline sensation that nearly drowned out my own nausea. Krios Delta was the ancestral cradle of the Oculon people, a world of singing ice and silicate spires that reached up like frozen fingers to touch the violet sky. It is, as the archives described, Zelanthia whispered. She had moved to the viewport, her skin shimmering with a light so pure it made the cabin's emergency lamps look like guttering candles. The resonance here, it is ancient. It is the heartbeat of my ancestors. It's a giant ice cube with a death wish, I muttered, finally standing up. I checked the internal sensors. The void rat was running on fumes and prayers. The scrap moon skirmish had left our starboard stabilizer twitching like a dying insect, and our thermal shielding was down to 40% capacity. Rook, we can't hover. The atmosphere is too thin. We need to find a landing shelf near the vault coordinates before the engines flatline. I'm already on it, Sprocket Head, Rook snapped, though there was no real heat in his voice. He was scared. Even a legend of the underworld knew when he was out of his depth. Coordinates locked, bringing her down in the shadow basin. It's a deep trench, shielded from orbital scans by the silicate ridges. We'll have to hoof it the rest of the way. The descent was a nightmare of turbulence. The void rat screamed as it hit the upper atmosphere of Krios Delta. I stayed glued to the power grid, manually diverting every scrap of energy to the inertial dampeners. Through the bond, I felt Zelanthia bracing herself, her spirit wrapping around mine like a shield. It wasn't just physical strength she was giving me anymore. It was a clarity of purpose. I wasn't just a miner trying to survive. I was the guardian of the last hope for a dozen star systems. We hit the ice with a bone-shattering jar. The ship skidded for at least 500 meters, throwing up plumes of frozen silicate before finally coming to a halt at the base of a towering, translucent cliff. Rook cut the engines. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the ticking of the cooling metal. We're down, Rook said, his voice unusually soft. Check your seals. The air out there is 40 degrees below zero and carries enough silicate dust to turn your lungs into glass in 10 minutes. I grabbed my heavy-duty environmental suit, the same one I'd worn in the deep-bore tunnels of Velonis Prime. It was patched, ugly, and smelled of old oil, but it was reliable. Zelanthia, however, didn't need a suit. As an Oculon of the royal bloodline, her biology was designed to thrive in extreme cold. Her skin darkened to a deep protective obsidian, and a shimmering field of energy began to pulse around her body, a natural atmospheric envelope. You look like a goddess of the void, I said, my voice muffled by my helmet's internal comms. And you look like a very sturdy machine, Cyprian Vane, she replied, her golden eyes glowing through the darkness of the cabin. She reached out, her gloved hand resting against my faceplate. Even through the reinforced glass, I felt the warmth of our connection. Are you ready to see the truth? I'm ready to get this over with, I said, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. We stepped out onto the surface of Krios Delta, and for a moment I forgot how to breathe. The world was a cathedral of light. The silicate spires acted like massive prisms, catching the faint light of the distant sun and refracting it into a million shimmering rainbows. The ice beneath our boots hummed, a low melodic vibration that I could feel through the bond. The singing ice, Zelanthia whispered, her voice carrying an edge of sorrow. It is the record of every soul that has ever lived on this world. The thalassocracy wants to silence it. They want to turn this music into a scream. Not on my watch, Rook growled, checking the charge on his pulse rifle. The vault entrance should be 3 kilometers to the north, buried under the Glacier of Tears. Let's move. We're burning daylight, and I've got a feeling we aren't the only ones who made the jump. The trek was a test of endurance I hadn't faced since my rookie year in the mines. The silicate dust swirled in the wind, scouring my suit and making every step feel like I was dragging a mountain. But every time my legs threatened to give out, I felt a surge of energy from Zelanthia. She wasn't just sharing her strength, she was translating the world for me. Through her eyes, the treacherous ice fields weren't obstacles. They were a path, marked by the thermal signatures of the ancient ones. Wait, I said, stopping abruptly as we reached a wide, frozen lake. My cortex link was pinging a warning. We've got static, high-frequency pings. Someone is painting the area with a localized sonar sweep. Rook dived behind a silicate outcrop, gesturing for us to stay low. Hounds? Worse, I said, checking the data stream. It's a military-grade sweep. The thalassocracy didn't just send scouts. They sent a suppression team. They are already at the vault, Xylanthia whispered, her light dimming to a fearful gray. I can feel the resonance of their machines. They are drilling into the ice. They are hurting the world. The anger that flared in me wasn't just mine. It was hers, amplified by the bond until it felt like a physical fire in my chest. I looked at Xylanthia, and for the first time, I didn't see a princess or a victim. I saw a sovereign whose kingdom was being desecrated. Rook, how many? I asked. 6 signatures on the ridge. Heavy armor. 2 more near the entrance. Rook reported, his cybernetic eye narrowing. We're outgunned, kid. If we go in loud, we're dead space. Then we don't go in loud, I said, my mind shifting back to the dirty work tactics of the mines. XY, can you mask our thermal signatures? If you can wrap your energy field around all 3 of us, we might be able to ghost past their sensors. It will be difficult, she said, her light flickering with doubt. To mask a human's erratic heat sig requires a level of synchronization I have never attempted. It will drain me, Cyprian. I'll give you the juice, I said, stepping closer to her. Use the bond. Take whatever you need. I've got plenty of stubbornness to spare. She looked at me, her golden eyes swirling with a mixture of love and terror. If I take too much, your heart might... My heart is fine, Sci. It's been through worse than a little Oculon magic. Do it. She closed her eyes, her skin beginning to pulse with a slow hypnotic rhythm. I felt a sudden, sharp pull in my chest, a sensation like a cold needle drawing out my very essence. I gasped, my knees buckling, but I held on. I focused on the memory of the light in room 42, the sound of her laughter, the taste of her skin. I poured everything I was into the connection. Slowly, a shimmering, translucent veil began to expand from Xylanthia, wrapping around Rook and me. In an instant, the biting cold of the wind vanished, replaced by a strange, humming stillness. To the thalassocracy's sensors, we were now nothing more than 3 more blocks of ice. Damn, kid, Rook whispered, his voice sounding like it was coming from a long way off. You really are a biological anomaly. Let's move before you turn into a popsicle for real. We moved across the lake, gliding past the sentries like shadows. I could see the enforcers clearly, sleek, black-armored figures wielding heavy plasma rifles, their helmets scanning the horizon for a princess that was walking right under their noses. The tension was so thick I could taste it, a metallic tang that made my stomach knot. We reached the base of the Glacier of Tears. The thalassocracy had set up a massive thermal drill, its orange beam cutting into the ancient ice with a deafening roar. Steam hissed into the air, creating a thick, white fog that smelled of burnt minerals. The entrance is behind that drill, Xylanthia signaled through the bond. I could feel her pain, a sharp echoing cry for every inch of ice the drill destroyed. We must stop them before they breach the inner sanctum. I can take the guards on the left, Rook whispered, his rifle humming as it powered up. But the drill operator is shielded. You'll have to get close to override the controls. I've got the drill, I said. XY, keep the veil up as long as you can. Once I hit the override, the whole area is going to light up like a supernova. I crawled toward the drill, my boots silent on the slushy ice. My hands were shaking, but as I reached the control panel, my engineering instincts took over. I didn't need a high-tech scanner to know how this thing worked. It was a standard industrial-grade thermal borer, the same kind we used to clear debris in the shafts. I pulled a small, jury-rigged bypass key from my suit, the one Bax had given me back at the Zenith Ring, and jammed it into the data port. System override in 3, 2, 1. The drill let out a sudden, high-pitched scream. The orange beam flared, turning a brilliant, violent purple before exploding into a fountain of sparks. The operator shouted in alarm, but before he could react, Rook opened fire. The silence of the glacier was shattered by the roar of pulse rifles and the hiss of plasma. "The veil is down!" Zelanthia cried, her light erupting in a defiant blaze. She lunged forward, her palms striking the armored chest of an enforcer, sending him flying 20 meters into a silicate spire. I didn't have a rifle, but I had a 3-foot-long kinetic wrench and a whole lot of built-up frustration. I swung at an enforcer who was trying to flank XY, the heavy tool connecting with his helmet with a sound like a hammer hitting an anvil. He went down, his optical sensor flickering out. "Cyprian, watch out!" A heavy stun bolt caught me in the shoulder, throwing me backward. I hit the ice hard, the breath leaving my lungs in a cold puff. My vision swam, and for a second the bond went silent. "No!" Zylanthia's voice was a roar of white light. I looked up to see her standing over me, her entire body incandescent. She wasn't just an Oculon anymore. She was a storm of pure energy. She raised her hands and the silicate ice around us began to resonate, a low-frequency hum that grew into a deafening, glass-shattering scream. The enforcers clutched at their helmets, their armor plating cracking under the pressure of the sonic wave. In seconds, the area was clear. The survivors scrambled back toward their transports, fleeing the wrath of a princess they had underestimated for too long. Rook stood in the center of the carnage, his rifle smoking. "Remind me never to get on her bad side," he muttered, helping me to my feet. Zelanthia turned to me, her light slowly fading. She looked exhausted, her dark skin streaked with silicate frost. "Are you hurt, Cyprian?" "I'm fine," I said, rubbing my throbbing shoulder. "Just a little rattled. But that light, that wasn't just a defense protocol. It was the song of the ice," she said, looking at the massive arched doorway that had been revealed behind the ruined drill. "They opened the door, and now the ancestors are waiting." The doorway was made of a material that wasn't metal and wasn't stone. It looked like solid smoke, shifting and swirling as we approached. As Zelanthia reached out, the smoke parted, revealing a long, sloping tunnel that led deep into the heart of the planet. "We are here," she whispered, "the lost vault of Cryos." As we stepped into the darkness, the bond flared with a new, terrifying sensation. It wasn't just Zelanthia anymore. There were thousands of voices, thousands of heartbeats, all reaching out from the shadows. We weren't just walking into a ruin. We were walking into a living machine. And I had a feeling that before we left, one of us was going to have to make a choice that couldn't be undone. The air inside the vault was different. It didn't taste of recycled oxygen or silicate dust. It tasted of time, a heavy, static-charged atmosphere that felt like breathing in the history of a civilization. As we descended deeper into the heart of Krios Delta, the walls began to glow with a faint, bioluminescent pulse that mirrored Zelanthia's heartbeat. "This isn't a tomb," I whispered, my voice echoing off the smooth, dark surfaces. "It's a reactor. The whole mountain is a giant biological power cell." "It is the core," Zelanthia said, her golden eyes wide with a mixture of reverence and dread. "The source of all Oculon resonance. My ancestors didn't just live here. They became part of the planet. They encoded their consciousness into the silicate lattice." Rook was moving with a tense, professional caution, his rifle scanning the shadows. "And the thalassocracy wants to plug their void scream weapon into this? That's like trying to jumpstart a shuttle with a supernova. If they miscalculate, they won't just shut down communications. They'll crack the planet like an egg." "They do not care about the world," Zelanthia said, her voice hard. "They only care about the silence that follows." We reached a massive central chamber. In the middle of the room, a pillar of pure, swirling light reached from the floor to the vaulted ceiling. Around it, dozens of crystalline consoles sat in silent vigil, their surfaces etched with glowing runes that shifted as we moved. "The resonance emitter," I said, my engineering brain immediately trying to map the flow of energy. "If we can disrupt the harmonic frequency, we can lock the vault down. It'll be a permanent seal. No one, not even the thalassocracy, will be able to touch it." "But to do that," Zelanthia added, her voice trembling, "I would have to merge with the core. I would have to give up my physical form to become the lock." I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach. "No, there has to be another way. I can bypass the crystals, maybe create a feedback loop in the power lines." You cannot fix this with a wrench, meat man, a cold, cultured voice echoed through the chamber. We spun around to see a figure emerging from the shadows of the far archway. He was tall, even for an Oculon, his skin a pale, sickly white that looked like bone. He wore a suit of ornate golden armor that was interlaced with glowing purple veins, the mark of a drained one who had found a way to survive on stolen energy. High Archon Valerius, Zelanthia spat, her light flaring a sharp, angry crimson. Valerius smiled, a thin, mirthless expression. Princess Zelanthia, you have led us on a merry chase across the hegemony, but I must thank you. I could never have found the exact resonance frequency of the core without your unique biological signature leading the way. Behind him, a dozen elite enforcers stepped out of the darkness, their weapons trained on us. Rook raised his rifle, but a sharp pulse of energy from one of the consoles sent him flying backward, his weapon skittering across the deck. "Rook!" I shouted, moving toward him, but the enforcers were already on me. Two of them grabbed my arms, pinning me to the floor. My helmet's faceplate cracked against the hard silicate, and I tasted blood. "Release the human, Valerius," Zelanthia commanded, her voice vibrating with power. "This is between us." "Is it?" Valerius stepped onto the raised platform near the core, his purple veins pulsing with light. "I see the bond, Princess. I see the meat man who has become your anchor. It is a fascinating mutation, but it is also a weakness." He made a sharp gesture, and one of the enforcers pressed a stun baton into my side. I roared in pain, my muscles seizing as 100,000 volts of energy tore through my nervous system. Through the bond, I felt Zelanthia's agony, a sharp, echoing scream that mirrored my own. "Stop it!" "Cheeria," she cried, her light flickering wildly. "The void scream requires a catalyst," Valerius said, his voice calm and clinical. "A royal blood whose resonance is perfectly harmonized with the core. I was going to use your father, but his light was brittle. He died before he could complete the sequence." "You murdered him," Zelanthia whispered. "I utilized him," Valerius corrected. "But you are different. Your bond with this human has strengthened your resonance. It has given you a density I have never seen. You are the perfect key, Zelanthia. All you have to do is step into the light." "Never." Valerius looked at me, a cold, calculating gleam in his eyes. "The human is struggling, Princess. His heart is already strained by your bond. If I continue to apply pressure, his biology will simply fail. Is his life worth your defiance?" The stun baton hit me again, harder this time. I felt my vision start to fade, the edges of the chamber turning to a dull, gray blur. I could feel Zelanthia's desperation, her spirit reaching out to mine, trying to hold me together. "Cyprian," her voice echoed in my mind. "I cannot let them hurt you. I will do it. I will step into the core." "No, Jai," I thought, my mind sluggish and heavy. "If you do, you're gone. You'll be a part of the machine. You'll be the scream they want. It is the only way to save you." "No," I insisted, a sudden sharp clarity piercing through the pain. My engineering brain, the part of me that understood how things were built and how they were broken, saw the truth. The bond, it isn't a siphon. It's a bridge. We don't have to be the lock, Z. We have to be the frequency. "What is he whispering?" Valerius demanded, stepping closer to me. "The human's brain is misfiring. End his suffering." The enforcer raised the baton one last time, but before he could strike, I grabbed his wrist. The strength that surged through me wasn't mine. It was the combined force of two species, a resonance that had finally found its perfect harmonic. "You're wrong, Archon," I said, my voice sounding like a chorus of thunder. "We aren't a weakness. We're the glitch in your system." I looked at Zelanthia, and in that moment, our souls didn't just touch, they merged. I saw the core not as a machine, but as a living memory. I saw the silicate lattice as a circuit board, and I saw Zelanthia not as a key, but as the architect. "Now!" I shouted. Zelanthia didn't step into the core. She reached out and grabbed my hand. Together, we lunged toward the central console. The enforcers fired, but the energy rounds were swallowed by the brilliant, golden-white field that now surrounded us. Valerius screamed in rage, drawing a crystalline blade, but he couldn't get close. The resonance was too high, a frequency that shattered the purple veins of his stolen energy. "Cyprian, guide me!" Ixalanthia cried, her hands glowing as she touched the runes. I didn't know the Oculon language, but I knew the math. I saw the load-bearing arcs of the power grid, the fluid dynamics of the resonance flow. I guided her fingers, directing the massive energy of the core into a single localized point. We didn't lock the vault. We didn't activate the weapon. We performed a system wipe. A massive, blinding wave of pure white light erupted from the pillar, spreading through the chamber like a silent explosion. I felt my suit's sensors overload and die. I felt the air around us turn to static. And then I felt the connection snap. Silence. When I opened my eyes, the chamber was dim. The massive pillar of light had subsided to a soft, pulsing ember. Valerius and his enforcers were gone, dissolved by the purity of the resonance wave, or perhaps just scattered into the void. Rook was sitting up against a pillar, rubbing his head. Well, that was one hell of a light show. Did we win? I looked around for Xylanthia. She was lying on the platform, her skin a pale, misty violet. She looked small, fragile, and utterly human in the fading light. XY? I crawled toward her, my breath hitching in my chest. She opened her eyes, the gold now flecked with shades of deep, human brown. She reached out, her hand finding mine. "I am still here," she whispered. "The bond?" I asked, terrified of the silence in my head. "It is changed," she said, a small, weary smile playing on her lips. "It is no longer a protocol, Cyprian. It is just us. The core is empty, the archives are safe, and the thalassocracy, they have nothing but shadows now." I pulled her close, the cold of the planet finally beginning to seep through my damaged suit. But I didn't care. For the first time in my life, I wasn't an engineer, or a miner, or a student. I was just a man who had found his place in the universe. We had made a choice. We had chosen the messy, complicated truth of our connection over the sterile, safe lies of our destinies. "We need to get to the ship," I said, looking at the cracked ceiling of the vault. "Rook's going to charge us extra for the emotional distress." "I think," Xylanthia said, leaning her head against my shoulder, "that I would like to see the stars again. Not as data, but as light." "Anything you want, Princess," I said, helping her to her feet. "Anything you want." As we walked out of the vault and back into the singing ice of Krios Delta, I knew the battle wasn't over. The thalassocracy would return, and the hegemony would still want their princess. But as I felt her hand in mine, solid and warm, I knew that whatever came next, we were ready. Because we weren't just two beings trying to survive anymore. We were the bridge, and a bridge, if built right, can weather any storm. The silicate dust of Krios Delta was still settling in the seams of my environmental suit as the void rat clawed its way back into the velvet embrace of the vacuum. Behind us, the glacier of tears looked like a shattered diamond, its internal light dimmed but not extinguished. We had left the vault behind, but the silence that filled the ship was different now. It wasn't the silence of things left unsaid. It was the quiet of a machine that had finally stopped screaming. I sat in the engineering bay, my hands shaking as I attempted to recalibrate the primary power coupling. The system wipe we'd triggered in the vault had backfed through our bond, leaving me feeling like I'd been hollowed out and stuffed with static. My vision was still fuzzed at the edges with that strange ultraviolet tint, but the crushing weight of the protocol had vanished. "You're over-torquing that bolt, sprocket head," Rook's voice rasped from the doorway. I looked up. The old smuggler looked like he'd been dragged through a rock crusher. His cybernetic eye was flickering, and a long, ugly burn mark traced a path across his shoulder where an enforcer's plasma bolt had grazed him. He was leaning against the bulkhead, clutching a canister of industrial-strength stimulant. "I'm just making sure it stays put, Rook," I said, my voice sounding thin and metallic. "I don't want us falling apart when we hit the next jump gate." Rook limped into the room and sank onto a crate. He took a long, rattling swig of the stimulant. "We're already falling apart, kid. The ship is a collection of miracles and duct tape at this point. But we're still breathing. That's more than I expected when we touched down on that ice cube." I set the wrench down, my fingers finally going still. Valerius is gone. The vault is wiped, but the thalassocracy isn't going to just give up, is it? Doubt it, Rook grunted. Men like that don't stop until they're turned into space dust. But they lost their key. Without that resonance frequency, the void scream is just a pile of expensive junk. You and the princess, you did more than just break a lock. You broke the future they were trying to build. He looked at me then, his one organic eye narrowed in a way that wasn't cynical for once. I've spent 30 years running from the high bloods and the gear lords. I thought everyone was just a different kind of predator or prey. But watching you two down there, seeing you give up your own rhythm to save her, it was a hell of a thing, Cyprian. I didn't do it to be a hero, Rook, I said, looking at my hands. I did it because I couldn't imagine a world where she was just a fuel cell. It wasn't a calculation. It was just the only thing that felt right. That's exactly what a hero would say, Rook laughed, a dry coughing sound. But don't worry, I won't tell anyone. It'd ruin your reputation as a gritty dust eater. Salanthia drifted into the bay then, her presence preceded by that unmistakable scent of rain on hot asphalt. Her skin was a pale, translucent silver, the cerulean pathways beneath her surface pulsing with a soft, steady rhythm. She looked exhausted, but her golden eyes held a clarity that made me feel like I was seeing her for the first time. Rook is correct, she said, her voice a gentle chord that resonated in my chest. The bond has shifted. It is no longer a siphon. It is a shared language. I can feel your fatigue, Cyprian, but I also feel your peace. Peace is a strong word for someone who's one short circuit away from a total meltdown. I joked, though I reached for her hand. The contact was no longer an electric jolt. It was a warm, familiar hum, like the sound of a well-tuned engine. We cannot stay in the shadows forever, Salanthia said, her gaze shifting to the viewport where the stars were beginning to blur into the streaks of hyperspace. If we do not return to the Zenith Ring, the thalassocracy will simply find another victim, another way to twist the resonance. My mother must know the truth. The council must see what we have found. You want to go back? Rook asked, raising a gray eyebrow. To the place that tried to hand you over in a gift wrap? That's a bold move, princess, or a suicidal one. It is a necessary one, she replied. We are no longer fugitives running from a fate. We are witnesses to a new possibility. If a human and an oculon can bridge the void between their souls, then perhaps our civilizations can finally stop trying to consume one another. I looked at her, seeing the royal blood in her. Yes, but seeing the girl from room 42 even more. She had stopped being a princess the moment she chose to stay with a meat man. She was a revolutionary now, and I was her first recruit. The Zenith Ring is 3 days away if we push the burners, I said, my mind already calculating the fuel ratios and the navigation curves. Rook, can your ship handle one more run into the lion's den? Rook looked at his ship, then at us. He let out a long sigh and tossed the empty stimulant canister into the recycler. She'll handle it. She's too stubborn to die, just like her pilot. But I'm charging you triple time for the emotional distress. And I want a front row seat when you tell those high and mighty bastards to go to hell. Deal, I said. The next 72 hours were a blur of frantic repairs and quiet conversations. As I worked on the Void Rat systems, I felt Xylanthia's influence in every thought. I wasn't just fixing machines, I was understanding the flow of their energy. I could hear the song of the turbines, the harmonic resonance of the hull plating. It was a gift from her, a new way of seeing the world that made my engineering manuals look like child's play. But more than that, I was processing the change in myself. I had spent my whole life believing that I was a tool, something to be used by the mining guild, something to be discarded when I broke. But Xylanthia had looked at me and seen an architect. She had seen value in my flaws and strength in my stubbornness. We reached the Zenith Ring at 2300 hours on the third day. The station looked different in the light of the Nebulan Veil, less like a prison and more like a stage. We didn't use the smuggler's docks this time. We flew straight for the primary diplomatic umbilical, our transponder shouting Xylanthia's royal signature for every sensor on the station to hear. Attention, Zenith Ring Command. Xylanthia's voice rang out over the open hailing frequency. This is Princess Xylanthia of the House of Ethelgard. I am returning to the station under the protection of the bonding protocol. I request immediate audience with the High Council. We have news from Cryos Delta. There was a long silence, the kind of silence that precedes a tectonic shift. Identity confirmed, a voice finally replied, sounding stunned. Clearance granted for Bay 1. Prepare for immediate escort to the Sovereign Wing. Here we go, I whispered, tightening the seals on my suit. Rook looked at me and gave a sharp, military-grade salute. Don't let them blink, you kid. You've got the heat. Use it. As the airlock cycled open, I felt the bond lock into a fierce, defiant harmony. We stepped out onto the polished chrome of the station, a meat man from the pits and a princess from the stars, walking hand in hand toward a future that was no longer written in blood or blueprints. The sovereign wing of the Zenith Ring was a masterpiece of architectural arrogance. Towering pillars of translucent marble reached toward a vaulted ceiling that projected a real-time feed of the surrounding nebula. It was a place designed to make people feel small, to remind them that the hegemony was as eternal as the stars themselves. But as I walked through the halls, my boots clanging against the pristine deck, I didn't feel small. I felt like a landslide. Zelanthia walked beside me, her skin a brilliant, incandescent cerulean. She wasn't hiding her light anymore. She was radiating it like a sun. The guards, clad in their ceremonial gold and silver armor, stepped back as we passed, their optical sensors widening in disbelief. They weren't just seeing a returning princess. They were seeing the shimmer of the bond, a visible aura of light that connected us like a physical bridge. We reached the council chamber, a massive circular theater where the leaders of the Oculon houses and the human delegates of the hegemony sat in judgment. At the center sat the matriarch of Ethelgard, Zelanthia's mother. Her skin was a cold, frosted white, and her eyes were as sharp as obsidian shards. "Daughter," the matriarch said, her voice echoing through the silent chamber, "you return to us in the company of a criminal and a scavenger. You have desecrated the bloodline of our ancestors with this mutation." Zelanthia didn't flinch. She stepped into the center of the floor, pulling me with her. "I return to you with the truth, Mother. The mutation you speak of is the only thing that saved the Oculon people from the silence of the void scream." A murmur rippled through the council. The mention of the forbidden weapon was like a spark in a fuel cell. "The thalassocracy is dead in the cryo system," Zelanthia continued, her voice rising in power. "High Archon Valerius tried to use the core to shatter the galaxy. He tried to turn our resonance into a weapon of mass destruction, and he would have succeeded if not for the very meat man you despise." "Absurd," a delegate from the Iron Sect barked. "A human cannot manipulate resonance. They are biologically deaf." "I'm not deaf anymore," I said, stepping forward. My voice was steady, the sarcasm I'd used as armor for 25 years replaced by a hard, unyielding clarity. "I've spent my life in the dark, digging for your ores and building your stations. I thought I knew what strength was. I thought it was about how much weight you could carry or how many blows you could take." I looked at the matriarch, meeting her cold gaze with my own. But I was wrong. Real strength isn't about endurance. It's about choice. I chose to bind my life to Zylanthia's. I chose to see her not as a princess or a prize, but as a person. And because I made that choice, our resonance became something you can't measure with your sensors. It became a bridge. "Show them, Cyprian," Zylanthia whispered. I took her hands, and for the first time I didn't hold back. I let the bond flare to its full capacity. The air in the chamber began to vibrate, a low-frequency hum that grew into a glorious, multi-tonal chord. The marble pillars began to glow, and the holographic nebula overhead shifted, its colors aligning with the rhythm of our hearts. It wasn't a weapon. It was a song of two different worlds finding a common frequency. The council members shielded their eyes, their own bioluminescence flickering in sympathy with our light. Even the matriarch seemed to lean back, her cold facade cracking for a brief, flickering second. "The vault is sealed," Zelanthia said as the light slowly subsided. "The core has been wiped of the thalassocracy's taint. We didn't do it with a key or a protocol. We did it by being together. If you want to talk about duty, then listen to this. Our duty isn't to the past or to the bloodlines. Our duty is to the future. A future where we stop seeing each other as resources and start seeing each other as partners. The silence that followed was absolute. For a long minute, no one moved. Then the matriarch stood up. She walked down from her high seat, her long robes hissing against the floor. She stopped a few feet from us, her eyes searching Zelanthia's face, then mine. "You have changed, Zelanthia," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "The light you carry, it is not the light of Ethelgard. It is something older and newer." "It is the light of choice, Mother," Zelanthia said. The matriarch looked at me. For the first time, I didn't see judgment in her eyes. I saw curiosity. "You are an architect, Cyprian Vane?" "I'm getting there," I said. "Then perhaps," she said, turning back to the council, "it is time we built something different. The thalassocracy's defeat gives us a moment of peace. Let us use it to study this bridge." The council didn't break out into cheers. There were still arguments, still doubts, still centuries of prejudice to overcome. But the immediate threat was gone. The execution orders were retracted. The hounds were called off. For the first time in my life, I wasn't running. 6 weeks later, the Zenith Ring felt like a different world. The reconstruction of the water reclamation grid had been completed, but I wasn't just a student watching from the sidelines anymore. I was one of the lead consultants, working alongside Oculon engineers to integrate harmonic resonance into the station's structural dampeners. I stood on the observation deck of Sector 9G, watching a new transport shuttle dock with the station. I was wearing a clean, modern engineer's jumpsuit, the Ethelgard crest stitched subtly onto the collar, a gift from the matriarch. "Thinking about the pits?" Zelanthia asked, appearing beside me. She was wearing her student robes again, but she carried herself with a new kind of freedom. "Sometimes," I said, putting my arm around her, "it's hard to forget the dust when you've spent so long breathing it. But looking at all this, it feels like a dream I'm finally awake for." "It is no dream, meat man," she teased, her golden eyes flecked with that new human brown. "It is a reality we built, bolt by bolt, beat by beat." We stood there in silence for a long time, watching the stars. The galaxy was still a dangerous place, and there were still people who would try to turn our bond into something ugly. But as I felt her heart beating in perfect sync with mine, I knew we were ready. I realized then that my father had been right about one thing. Life is too short for forcing dreams on people. But he was wrong about the rest. Life isn't about following a path. It's about being brave enough to fall off the path and find someone to help you back up. I used to spend my nights in the Veloni slag pits looking up at the tiny pinpricks of light between the tunnel gaps, thinking that the stars were just cold, distant rocks that didn't care if I lived or died. I thought my whole existence was mapped out by the depth of the ore veins and the whims of the guild bosses. I was a gear in a machine that didn't know my name. But now, standing on the edge of the void, I realize that the galaxy isn't cold. It's full of resonance, waiting for someone to find the right frequency. I've learned that the most important structures we build aren't made of carbon nanotubes or silicate glass. They're made of the moments when we choose to see another person's soul through the layers of our own fear. I'm still a dust eater at heart. I still like the feel of a wrench in my hand and the smell of ozone in the air. But I've learned that I don't have to be just anything. I can be a miner and an architect. I can be a human and a partner to a being made of light. I spent 25 years trying to find a way out of the dirt, only to realize that the dirt was just the foundation. What matters is what you decide to build on top of it. We aren't defined by where we start or by the DNA our ancestors handed down to us. We are defined by the bridges we choose to cross and the people we choose to cross them with. And for the first time in my life, I'm not afraid of the height. I spent a long time thinking that my flaws and my rough edges made me unworthy of the stars, that I had to be perfect to belong in a place like the Zenith Ring. But in the end, it was my scars and my stubbornness that allowed me to bridge a void no one else could cross. I wonder, what are the parts of yourself you've been trying to hide or fix because you think they make you less? What if those very cracks are the places where the light is supposed to get in? If you could stop trying to be the person the world expects you to be, who would you choose to become instead? I reached out and interlaced my fingers with Zelanthia's, our combined light casting a soft, steady glow against the viewport. Outside, the sun was just beginning to peek over the curve of the station, painting the clouds of the nebula in 1,000 shades of a brand new day.